Welcome back to the seventh episode of Season 1 of the TURD Podcast, also known as the Ultra Race Directors Podcast. I'm your host, Shalini Bhajjan, and I'm excited to introduce today's guest. So let's get rolling. I'd like to welcome Carrie Baris, the race director for Hellbender, hosted by Run828 Foundation in Old Fort, North Carolina. Welcome to the podcast, Kim.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. Yeah. And
Well, let's start off with who is Carrie Baris?
so I am well, I've been a runner my pretty much my whole life. Since middle school when I didn't make the soccer team or the basketball team. And I am not coordinated, so I joined the cross country team and it's kind of been part of my life since then. I've done a fair amount of backpacking. I kind of like left running for a while after high school and then found my way back to it. I don't even know how long ago it is now, but through my sister, she's my biggest inspiration as a runner. And so she's been an ultra runner for a very long time. I always brag on her. Her name's Lainey. And if you look at her ultra sign up, she's got 100 plus completions and ultra events.
Sure.
Um, so I've been a runner forever. I'm an equestrian. Have a horse. So I train both of us to run long distance. So we do endurance horseback riding
Sure.
and ride and tie, which I kind of gave you an introduction to earlier, but it's a team sport where it's two people teamed with one horse, and we use the horse to move down the trail faster. So it's like a relay
Gotcha.
using the horse as the baton.
Sure.
So we leave the horse tied to a tree in the woods and are constantly kind of chasing after each other with the horse. So that's actually my main sport.
Sure.
Yeah, and I live in Western North Carolina. I'm originally from New England, Connecticut, and kind of made my way here about 15 years ago via San Diego, which is kind of a weird trajectory. But I used to be a high school English teacher. I did that for 19 years. And yeah, now I kind of cobble some things together. But I'm lucky enough that I don't have to have like a full-time job right now.
Sure.
I just spend my time kind of traveling and running and riding horses and those kinds of things. And I think that kind of sums it up.
So, Connecticut, what part in Connecticut? I've spent about 15 years in the Northeast, and actually, when I relocated, I was in Connecticut, Norwalk,
Okay.
Connecticut. Just
Oh, yep. I was in Durham, Connecticut, which is like
okay.
right in the middle of the state. Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Did you grow up? I guess you were born and brought up in Connecticut then, most of your adult life.
Yes, I lived there until I was 18 and then I moved away for college and then I haven't gone back. But my parents are still there, so I'm there a couple times a year at least.
Yeah. So outside of Lainey, your sister, younger or older? Younger sister, correct?
She's older.
Older sister, any other siblings?
Nope, just the two of us. Yeah.
So what was your transition like? Where did you go to school actually? Moving to
I,
Connecticut.
I went to Boston University. I have a degree in English literature and
Okay.
classical studies, so I
Cool.
can read Latin, which is pretty useless in the real world. But, and then I went and got a master's in education at UMass Boston. So.
Okay. So Connecticut to San Diego, did you say? Or was it San Fran?
Yeah, Connecticut to Boston and then to San Diego. I mean, honestly, just because the winters in Boston are awful.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I just got very tired of being cold. And I had friends move out to San Diego and I went and visited and it was 70 degrees in February. And I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah.
So I applied for a teaching job right out of grad school and they hired me. So I was out there for 6 years. Yeah.
What grade were you teaching at the time?
I taught 9 through 12,
Okay.
high school English. Yeah, so, and mostly 10th and 11th grade throughout my career, but I've done all 4
Sure.
years. Yeah.
And then San Diego to North Carolina, is that correct? Or was there?
Yes. Yep. And I moved here in 2010. I was dating someone who was a wildland firefighter,
Sure.
and his career had brought him here. and we actually met while I was out in San Diego, but he was working on a crew out of the Pisgah National Forest, which is here, and so I moved here with him. And then we got married in 2011, and he passed away in 2018. So I've been here, ever since. It's kind of like he brought me to this area, and it's a wonderful, beautiful,
Sure.
amazing area. So I'm very thankful for that. And obviously, it's you know a it was a tough time, certainly,
Sure.
but in the aftermath, I decided I wanted to stay here. And so I've really made a life and a home here, and I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah. And you said your family is still in Connecticut. Is your
Yes.
sister in North Carolina or close to? Do you get to visit?
No, she's in New Jersey. So she
Okay.
actually, you mentioned Kim Levinsky and her Sasquatch running
Oh, sure.
group. My sister does a bunch of her races, and I've done one as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so she's in New Jersey. So she trains for mountain races running at sea level, which is
Sure.
fun. Yeah, and I'm actually, I'm engaged. My fiance is in Virginia, and we're working on getting him down here to the mountains. So,
Yeah. I think that's cool that you've made a home and created a community, and North Carolina is home now. It's
yeah.
a pretty, there's a lot of heart. It's difficult moving around, and then, with life-changing events like that.
Hmm.
Um, so talk to me a bit about I know you said you ran in high school. Um, how did that transition into ultra running outside of your sister's influence? And what was your first ultra distance race? What was that like?
Okay, so when I ran in high school, I had, it was the 90s when I went to high school. So we had this coach that would just like drive us out to a trailhead and, tell us to run back to the high school, and we knew the trails fairly well, but I don't think that would fly anymore. But we did our long runs that way. He would just drop us off somewhere and we'd run back.
Sure.
We were lucky to have a trail system, right out of the back parking lot of the high school. So even though, cross country is kind of trail running, it's really running on grass and fields and sometimes in the woods. But I always loved the trail running part of it. And track and indoor track were not as attractive to me, but I enjoyed the running. I enjoyed the camaraderie. So I always knew I loved trail running, but then when I moved to Boston for college and grad school, I mean, there's not much
No.
trail access there. And so I would go up to like New Hampshire and Vermont. But I got way more into hiking and backpacking. And then when I was out in San Diego, I was doing a lot of backpacking. I did like the John Muir Trail and parts of the PCT and stuff like that. And then my sister called me up and said, she and her husband were coming out to do a marathon in Death Valley, and did I want to join them? And I was like, well, I don't really run all that often. And she's like, well, it's really just you hike up, this peak for 13 miles and then you run down the other side. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
I could probably handle that. I mean, I did train. So but the day of the race, it was pouring rain, and so they relocated it to a dirt road, and it was 13 miles out and 13 miles back. So it was not as fun as I thought it was going to be, but
Right.
that was kind of my first big trail race. And then shortly after that, I think that was like 2007 era.
Yeah.
Shortly after that, I ran my first 50K, and it was when I was in San Diego, or when I had moved from San Diego to North Carolina. I ran my first 50K, and it was out at Solly Recreation Area in North Carolina. And so I ran that 50K, and I just remember at the end of it, I was so tired, but I was already thinking about like, what could I do better next time to make this not be so painful? So
Sure.
I kind of got sucked in that way. And then, I do some ultra running, like, signing up for races, but I often get in my longer distances crewing and pacing for my sister at her big things. So
Gotcha.
I really train to pace her so I can keep up with her
It's a
out in the
full-time
woods.
job in itself, growing and
Right?
um with that involvement, and I know when you moved to North Carolina, actually, you know what? Let's touch on your equestrian background, was that something that you were doing as a kid? And then how did that kind of evolve to racing? Um, Talk to me a bit about that.
Yeah, so again, my sister. This is what happens when you have a big sister who does cool
Right.
stuff. But she got into horseback riding. I think my parents like let her do a pony ride when she was little, and she begged and begged for riding lessons. And my parents were very adamant that if we were going to ride horses, we were not a horse family or anything.
Sure,
But if we were going to do it, we had to take lessons. Like they didn't want to just throw us on a horse and like do whatever. So when I think she was maybe 6 or 7, she started riding lessons. And as I got a little older, I'm 3.5 years younger, I like begged to ride too. And so the instructor would let my mom lead me around on this little pony while my sister had her lessons. And as soon as I turned 6, I was allowed to take lessons.
sure,
And I took lessons and did some show ring stuff up until I was about 18. And again, when I moved to college, it just wasn't really feasible anymore. So I kind of got out of it, but my sister, she's a veterinarian, and I think it was when she finished vet school, or maybe towards the end, she bought a horse, and she's had a horse ever since. And so I'd go and visit her and ride. And then again, she called me up and she was like, "So I've been doing this thing called Ride and Tie, and there's a race in North Carolina, and somebody needs a partner because, it is a partner sport." And she's like, "I
sure.
think you'd really enjoy it because it's trail running and trail riding." And so my first race of Ride and Tie was, I think, 2013, and we
Okay.
did 30 miles.
Yeah,
So it's 30 miles of, at the starting line, one person's on the ground, one person's on the horse. You take off, you ride maybe half a mile or a mile into the woods, you tie the horse to a tree and run off, and then the runner gets to the horse, gets on, and chases down the person in front. And
gotcha.
so then you exchange constantly. And so the hardest part isn't the running or the riding, it's the mounting and dismounting
Yeah,
constantly.
yeah, yeah.
And that really dragged me back into the horse world. And in 2019, I bought a horse. I keep him at a friend's farm, and my fiance has a horse. We met through horses, and the goal right now is to combine and have our horses on a farm together somewhere
Sure.
that we own. So it really has like influenced my life a ton for sure.
Talk to me a bit about your horse.
His name is Comet. Um, because he really, well, I mean, horses, they come with pedigrees, but and he had a name before I got him, but
Sure,
he's an Arabian. We use Arabians for endurance because that's what they're bred for. They're kind of the best choice for it because they've got their heart rate and recovery and all that is really, really good. And you know, many of them are bred for endurance, bred for what we do. So,
gotcha.
as most listeners I'm sure are aware, endurance horse riding and ultra running are very closely knit. Western states, obviously, the
Yeah,
story
a
is
lot of
that
history.
yeah, Gordy Ainsley, his horse is lame, so he just ran it, and then within a couple of years, it turned into its own event. And but the horses, the Tevis Cup and Western States are still closely tied.
Sure.
But Gordy Ainsley was a ride and tie person before, all that. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
all kind of tied together, that history.
yeah. So moving to North Carolina, were you still teaching? And
Mhm.
how did you get involved with Run 828 Foundation and also, transitioning into Hellbender? And from what I'm understanding, you're full-time race director, correct? At the present moment.
Yes, yeah, I don't have like a different real job. I was teaching here when I moved to North Carolina. I got a job south of Asheville. I live in Asheville, so I got a job in Polk County, which is about 30 miles south of here. And I was there for 11 years. I made it through the COVID year,
Sure.
2020, 2021. And my school, since we're rural, we went back in person full time in August of 2020, which was, a little rough.
Yeah.
So I made it through that school year, and then I just had some resources in reserve and just decided like that was kind of it. I was done and I wanted to travel, and I'd kind of figure it out after that. And that's a place of privilege to be able to do that for sure.
Sure, sure, absolutely.
Um, but as I did, I was already involved in the running community pretty heavily. And I can't remember what year it is, but it's over ten years ago. Run828 Foundation is 11 years old, but we created, before I was involved, they also created like kind of an offshoot called the North Carolina Mountain Trail Runners. And they put on a few races that I'm now involved with, but they also have a Monday night meetup. Every Monday
Sure,
we meet up and run in the same spot, and we have different pace groups. And so the first night that they met, a friend of mine, my friend Beth, told me about it because she knew one of the people organizing it. And we went, and I had such a great time and met some great people that I kept going. And it's funny because she's only gone back maybe once or twice in the intervening like 10 years or so.
sure,
But I go back all the time. And so as we started to kind of organize a little bit more, I was asked to be a leader within that group. And then that kind of transitioned into being asked to be on the Run828 board several years ago. I can't remember how long ago it was,
right,
but I was kind of just loosely involved when Hellbender was created in 2018. I wasn't involved in any of the meetings at the beginning, but I was involved with the run club that was helping put it on. And my sister decided to run it in 2018 to kind of support us. And
sure,
so, and kind of the craziness of it is that my husband passed away 7 days before the first Hellbender. And so I always tell that story at the race itself, at the runners meeting, because it was such a pivotal moment for me in
sure,
my journey afterwards. Is that my sister came down right away, obviously to be with me, but then she said, I don't have to run this race. Like, we can do whatever you want. Like,
yeah,
we can go away, we can do whatever. And I said, no, I think like supporting you in this crazy race is like the best thing I can think of. And I always joke I hadn't really slept all week. And then, I was parked at Neels Creek, which is one of our aid stations, like passed out in the back seat of like, my car. And I slept like the best I'd slept the whole week. And I was like, all
right,
right, like ultra running fixed that. But it was just really moving to like get her through this tough race and be with her through that, and like to be with my family. My parents were there too, and so that it just really cemented Hellbender as like an important piece of my heart. And then we put the race on in 2019. We canceled it in 2020 and 2021. And we brought it back in 2022. And the original race director, Aaron Saft, was still directing it, and I was on the board by that point. And he resigned, and in like a good place, he just
sure,
basically said, like, I can't do this anymore. I've got too many other things going on. And so as the board kind of sat down, we went through a few different scenarios of who we could bring on to direct and whatever. But there was one meeting where we were kind of all sitting there trying to figure out what what we could do to make this race still happen, because it really is, race directing can be a full-time job, not
hmm,
all year, but for a lot of it.
yeah,
And so I had quit my job. So, I was sitting there kind of saying, well, I do a lot of volunteer work. I, was doing all this other volunteer stuff, but I said, you know what, I remember raising my hand being like, if you guys help me, I think I can make this happen.
sure,
And then we brought on Brandon Thrower, and as a basically as a consultant. He's a local race director. He has a company, Tanawa Adventures, well known in the area for the races he puts on. And he was one of the original people who created Hellbender.
gotcha,
He's the course designer. So we now work together. So the two of us, he's kind of I'd say the course director, and I'm the race director. So he does all the kind of back end, like permitting,
sure,
and he's got all the connections with the trail community out there because he puts on other races in the area. So he really does that kind of heavy lifting, and I'm the kind of front-facing
Sure.
email decision making kind of a part of it. But we've got a really good partnership, and
Yeah.
I think it's worked out really well. So this year was our third year doing it together. And, I also want to recognize the board. There's
Sure.
8 other people on the Run828 Foundation board. And, one of them's the volunteer coordinator, one of them's the finance person, so we
Yeah.
really do divide all those tasks up for
I
sure.
do I do have to compliment you from what I had, you and I met at the trail running conference, like formally met. And then
Hmm.
I was at Hellbender in 23 and I DNF'd and I just walked away the board itself and I feel like the community there is very diverse and everybody has a voice. Unlike a lot of other trail running communities where it's very singular. So I commend you for that and
Um,
being able to hold and create that. Before we dive into the meat of Hellbender, let's talk a little bit more about the Run828 Foundation and what other races there are that you're involved with and race directing.
Yeah, so the Run828 Foundation, our main event during the year is Hellbender 100, but not every board member is as involved, obviously, as I am or a few others. But that is our big event, and that is our big fundraiser.
Sure,
We are a nonprofit. So, actually last night we had, I always say it's one of my favorite meetings of the year where we sit down and talk about, okay, here's our, proceeds from the race. Here's how much money we can donate back into the community. Who are we giving it to and how much money do they get? And it's just so
sure,
much fun to see that, we really are having an impact. We gave a donation to McDowell County Schools. They're the school district where Hellbender is. And, they're a school district that doesn't have a lot of funding and obviously was very impacted by Helene this year, especially.
sure.
So it was really lovely to, that direct impact. Like we gave them this donation and then we got, a couple months later, got photos from the coaches in the running program with like, here are some of the kids wearing shoes that you guys, bought for them,
Right.
so they can run. And, that's just like a really good feeling to be able to do that. So, we give back to a bunch of different organizations. We support Girls on the Run, and other trail organizations in the area and other youth organizations in the area. And it's just really lovely to be able to do that. That's why we're all a part of the board. But we also, through the North Carolina Mountain Trail Runners, we put on 3 other short races. One is like we're putting on a 5K for the first time this year, and it supports the Street Dog Coalition, which is an organization where vets go out and spay and neuter and, support like homeless pet populations.
Sure.
So we're going to be donating our proceeds back to that. We put on a race, a 10K out in Canton, North Carolina, at basically a mountain bike and running preserve. And then we also put on the Gamble, which is a really fun concept that another board member, Kendall, came up with. And the route, it's in a park, and the route is a 1.67-mile loop. And about 5 seconds before the start, we roll the dice, and whatever the roll is how many loops everybody runs. So if you roll a 2, it's about a 5K. If you roll a
Right.
12, it's about 20 miles.
Sure.
So we've done it 4 times now, and the
Okay.
lowest we've rolled is a 4 this year. So it
Okay.
was about a 10K. And we've rolled an 11 one year, so they ran about 18 miles. And that was really cool because a lot of people sign up for it. We've had like, 40 to 50 people every year. And the year that we rolled and they ran 18 miles, several
Yeah.
people were like, I've never run 18 miles before, but I guess
Yeah.
I'm doing it. And they all did. Like we didn't have a lot of DNFs. So it was just really cool to see people be like, I didn't think I could run that far, and I
Sure.
did. And so it's nice to support runners that are, I mean, I spend a lot of time obviously with ultra
Yeah.
runners, but to support other runners who've got different goals and, to see that pride in those kind of experiences. So we do a lot, like we've done a lot in the community with kids races. We used to put on
Sure.
runs for kids, and we just, post Helene and some other, post COVID, post Helene, those haven't come back yet, but we've got some board members who are really working towards making kids events or more community events happen. So, and we're kind of at this point where we were finally past COVID and then Helene hit and that kind of
Yeah,
threw
just
us for a loop. And so now we're kind of rebounding back from that as well. But, like I said, we are able to donate a lot of money back into the community, which is
sure.
really, really wonderful.
So with the race that you just mentioned where you guys roll the dice, with that open format, I am assuming there's no cutoff or time limit. They've just got to knock out 18 miles, however long
Yeah.
it's
We do have our permit, I think, gives us 8 hours in the
right.
park. So, I feel like, and it's not a technical course
Sure.
really, since it's just kind of in a community park, but it is trail.
Yeah.
So they are running trail. But yeah, we've never had anyone miss kind of our final cutoff. We always just say, you have about 8 hours.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting when we've rolled less, a lot of people keep running just to like, they're like, oh, well, I need to do this many miles
Right.
today anyways. I'm just going to keep going.
Sure.
But it's a really fun kind of concept.
Yeah.
But yes, it is funny to plan for it. It's about a month before Hellbender.
Yeah.
So we have to buy enough supplies as if we're putting on a 20-mile race, but then like this year it was only to 10K. So,
Sure.
we were like, all right, everybody, we're just eating quesadillas for another hour because, we have
Right.
all this food, but then we roll over the non-perishable stuff to
Right.
Hellbender. So,
Gotcha. Um, so with that, now let's talk about Hellbender. Hellbender is both Western States and Hard Rock qualifier. So congratulations on that, you know, landmark,
Mhm.
so to speak. Have you run Hellbender?
Oh no. I have not. I've been on every part of the trail,
Yeah,
but I have not run Hellbender. And I always joke I direct it because that's easier than running the whole thing. And I don't I don't know if that's true, but it's a tough race.
yeah,
And it's interesting to hear runners afterwards talk about it. Um, and we had to have an alternate course this year because of
yeah,
Helene and all the damages to our trail system. And I saw someone commenting the other day on a post on Instagram that somebody had posted their sub 24-hour award because we do a special award for that.
right.
And somebody else said, "Wow, that's really sweet. I'd love to win that." And they were like, "Well, go run it right now while it's still
The
easy."
course is easy,
And I mean, it's not easy.
right?
It's still 20,000 feet of gain and
Sure.
loss,
Yeah,
40,000 feet of change overall, where normally it's 24,000 and
right.
48,000 feet of change. So it is, and we don't go up, normally we climb Mount Mitchell and go up
Right.
over 6,000 feet a couple times, and we just couldn't do that this year because of the storm damage. So I guess it is easier, but it's still not
No, and
easy.
it's
Um, and
trails are
that's
technical.
Yes, and I reached out to Hard Rock. I think it was right after I had taken over the race and right after
Sure.
our first running of it, and just kind of, inquired like, how do you guys pick qualifiers? I'm sure, I don't know if you're aware of our race, and they responded right away with, we are aware of your race, and we're
Yeah.
redoing our standards in the next year or so. And it was a positive response. And then we became a qualifier shortly after that, and I was actually kind of, I mean, I know our race is tough, and I know, if anything on the East Coast is going to prepare you for hard rock, and
Yeah.
there's not a lot of things that really prepare you for hard rock, but, if it's going to prove that you can, maybe make it through, I think it's one of the only ones,
Sure.
just because of the technicality of our trails
Yep.
and, the varying weather. We get storms over 6,000 feet. We've been
Yeah.
hailed on every year but one, and
Sure.
our race is in May.
Yeah.
But it is a tough race. But I think I was a little surprised when they gave it to us. So, we've run the race 6 times.
Yeah.
And so to be given that, I think it just honors the understanding of how difficult we've managed to make our race.
Right.
And I think people from the West Coast are often surprised that we normally have 4 climbs of over 3,000 feet. And you don't get that a lot on the East
Yeah.
Coast. We have some short, punchy, tough climbs, but it's hard to get those long, continuous ones. So,
Sure.
and the Western States qualifier status, I hadn't contacted them. I know a couple of our runners had,
Mm.
kind of like, hey, I ran this really tough race out east, like, what do you guys think? But I had not gotten in touch with them. And then last summer, I was camped out at a horse event in a field. I had like barely any service. And an email popped up on my phone that said, I could see the subject line. It said Western States qualifier, but I couldn't open the email. And I was like,
Which,
okay, this is just a runner asking me if we're a qualifier. Like,
right,
don't get excited, right? And then when I got to a spot where I had enough service to, get the message up, I read it and I was like, um, I was with my fiance. I was like, Chris, we just got Western States qualifier status. And
right,
he was
right.
like, what? How? I'm like, I don't know,
Yeah,
like, so it was a really, and I mean, I communicated with them afterwards and, it was just a really nice gift. So that has obviously elevated our race for sure to be a qualifier for both. And this year was the first time we ran it as a qualifier for both. And, definitely brought in more runners than we'd had in the
sure,
past. But I think we manage to hold on to that local feel and that community and that diversity and that, collective work ethic that we have as a board. I know some people were kind of worried about that, but, we're so enmeshed in the community that,
sure,
even if we're getting runners from all over the country and, we had some international runners, we're still holding on to that feel that we have, and
yeah,
obviously I'm biased, but, um, it is really nice to get that recognition as a race and as a
sure,
community, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in today's environment, I'm kind of like right there, old school, kind of adjusting to new school, new age, where the ultra running, trail running is headed. But it is so important to keep that home feel, even when the race just blows up and very few race directors can stay true to that. So it's really cool to see. And then let's dial back a little. So you said you've been on every part of the course. Do you have a
Mhm.
favorite segment or
Well,
sections?
yes, Heartbreak Ridge is one of my favorites. And we were able to keep it on the course this year, so that made me
Okay,
really happy. It's a beautiful long climb, and it's just, especially in May, the rhododendron and mountain laurel are all blooming. You've got,
sure.
I'm like a big flower nerd, so
Yeah,
I tell people that ahead of time, and some of them probably don't care, but a lot of people do talk about how beautiful it
I
is,
definitely
and
noticed flowers, wildflowers,
yes,
orchids.
yeah, it is really, really beautiful out there, and so that's probably my favorite section, of course. This year we added in the Bernard Mountain Trail as a replacement for some of our other trails that we've used. And I had never been on it previous to this year's race. So I went out, I try to get out on every section of trail. So I went out on it for the first time a few weeks before the race. And I was just like stunned by how beautiful it is.
Yeah,
It's a newer trail in the area. And again, the flowers were just like intense the whole way. It was just gorgeous. The views were amazing. And I just like fell in love with it. I've been out
yeah.
there a few times since. And I think my other favorite climb is Snook's Nose. It is probably the toughest climb on the original course. Unfortunately, the trail was partially washed out by a landslide. They are planning to rebuild it, but it will be different. It'll still be really tough, but that one
Sure.
was always uh, the one I think I heard from like runners the most
Yeah.
afterwards. I had one runner tell me that Snook's Nose hurt her feelings afterwards. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty rough, but
Yeah.
and maybe, you remember some of those trails from when you were out there, but I think those are the best. And they're the trails with the great views and all the flowers.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
you know.
So what mileage do those the two segments you mentioned come at in the race? I'm trying to.
So normally Snook's Nose would be at mile 25.
Okay.
It's the kind of the first big climb you hit. Now obviously it's not a part of it. Heartbreak is, let's see, kind of in the original course, it's the first, it would be, you're on that one twice. You go up it and down it. And we did that
Gotcha.
again this year. So again, it's about 20 something ish and 70 something ish.
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you go up it early and down it later. And so obviously it's kind of different with the way the course is. And Bernard, this year they went up, and it's rolling. That one's not just a climb, but they went up that one. Oh goodness. Probably in the teens. They dropped down and hit that first aid station after that one. They hit an aid station about mile 9, dropped down about 3 or 4 miles, and then climbed Bernard. So
Gotcha.
right around then. Yeah.
So, just briefly talk to me about the course layout for Hellbender. Is it entirely on the National Forest System, or what are the segments you're using? Just for people who are not aware. Um,
Okay, it is. So the original course is mostly national forest. It's the Pisgah National Forest. And we're on the grandfather district. And we also cross the Blue Ridge Parkway. So that means we permit through the National Park Service as well. And that is actually our biggest stumbling block right now because the
yeah,
parkway is still closed intermittently, and where our course is, it is closed.
gotcha.
Um, so where we start and end the race is south of the parkway in Old Fort, and we were not allowed to cross it at all. So the northern half of our course was inaccessible to us this year, and we're hoping that changes going into 2026. But it just, lots of variables
Yeah,
in, the funding and everything and the work they're doing out there. There are multiple landslides across the parkway in the area that needs to be open for us to have access. So they are working on those sections, but some of the access roads up to it were washed out as well, like Highway 80, which we use as access for our crews to get up to the parkway was washed out as well. So we're dealing with a lot of it's not necessarily the trails that are holding us back now, that access, it's those roads. So it's the Forest Service, the Park Service, then we permit through Mount Mitchell State Park.
gotcha.
Mount Mitchell, is the highest point east of the Mississippi at 6,600 feet. We take runners up to the top of it, but we also take them on a couple trails that are just below the summit.
Sure.
And so those trails are within the state park as well. And right now they don't have their access is off the parkway. So it's like, domino effect. We can't get on the parkway, so we can't get up to Mount Mitchell. And then we also permit through a couple of private landowners. Like we start in a race in Old Fort at Camp Greer, and they're a private property
Gotcha.
campground, like kids camp in the summer. And so we do our race in May before camper season opens. So we're
Right.
able to use all those buildings, like the bunkhouses, the cabins, all that, the bathrooms, the showers. They make meals for us and all that, it's a wonderful place to stage a race out of
Sure.
because it's all right there. But we have to obviously permit through them, and then part of our race runs along what we call the toll road because it used to be the old toll road to the top of Mount Mitchell back in,
Right.
whenever, before the parkway and everything. So that toll road section, half of the toll road is national forest land, and the other half is owned by a private organization. We call them the Bear Hunters, and they probably have a more official name, but
Right.
they have a bunch of like old bear hunting camps along that old toll road, and they still privately own that property. So we use one of their trails when we get to the top of Heartbreak Ridge and the top of the trail. We use about zero point 0.9 miles of a trail that they use to access the bear
Gotcha.
hunting areas. And
Yeah.
then when we turn onto the toll road, again, that's their access point.
Okay.
So it's interesting because it's like if we could make all our runners just run on one side of the road, they would be on Forest Service land. But if they're on the other side, they're
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
bear hunter property. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, so that mostly covers it. This
Sure.
year we also ran through Montreat, which is again a private trail, like the Montreat Retreat Center, and there's a
Yeah.
school there. They have, their own trails, and so we had to permit through them as well. And, we asked if we could put an aid station in one of their parking lots, and they said no because it was college graduation weekend. So
Sure.
that was obviously understandable, but an obstacle, for we had to have a remote aid station and like four-wheel drive everything in, and it couldn't be a crew access point as opposed to what we had wanted, which was, this parking lot where crew could come in. So
Sure.
yeah, and permitting is always very complex,
Yes,
obviously.
I
And
am. Yeah.
and really, like I said, Brandon Thrower does, most of that work for us,
Yeah.
which is really really, really helpful.
So with the storm damage and everything else and just in general, briefly talk to me about are you guys or how involved are you guys with trail maintenance and how much effort goes because again it's 100 miles and I know the course kind of goes up and down certain sections so it's just one set of trail work so to speak. But what sort of initiatives do you guys have for that and how far out
So
before the race?
yeah, we have right now Kendall Weaver is our kind of trail, person on the board. And it's always, we were talking about this last night, it's always really amusing to me, a month or two out from the race. He is just like mining Strava. Anybody runs on any of our trails, he's like,
Sure.
hey, did you see any downs on Heartbreak? Did you go up Newberry and see any of that? So he's
Yeah,
always like checking people's Strava because, 100 miles of course is hard to
absolutely.
know exactly what's going on every section of it. So between him and I and Brandon and a few other people on the board, we try to get feet on every part of the course in the,
Right.
the month or two leading up to it. Because it is hard to go out and say, February, check over the course because,
Oh yeah.
who knows what's going to
There's
happen between February and May. So, but we closely communicate with the Forest Service and, the bear hunting group and, whoever else about the trails, especially post Helene. It was really hard to get a grasp on what was going on out there.
yeah,
And, again, Brandon and Kendall really have those connections with people out in the Forest Service and the Park Service about what's going on those trails. And so there are a couple organizations that do a lot of the trail work out there. G5 Trail Collective is based out of Old Fort, and they do a ton of work out there, a ton of trail work. And so we, get as many of our members out there with them as we can, but they organize the trail work days, and we jump on when we can and help out. Kendall and I are both Sawyer certified. And so, sometimes he's out there with a chainsaw a lot of times right up to the race.
yeah.
And I always joke the day of the race, if you see a man running down the trail with an axe, it's probably Kendall, and he's
Right.
probably going to cut a tree for you.
Yeah.
Um, I know one year he was out on the Crest Trail cutting something down that he had gotten a report about, and it was like maybe he got it cut 5 minutes before the front runner
Okay.
came through. So we're really trying to make sure they're clear for people beforehand. And
Yeah.
there's also an organization called NC High Peaks, and they do a lot of the work in the Mount Mitchell area and the northern side
Gotcha.
of our course. So, and both of those organizations we donate to as well, because I know they're aware of our event, and I know that they specifically go out and check trails for us. And obviously, we want to support them, whether it's like with physical labor or donations to get them, some of the money they need for supplies and
Yeah.
whatever else. So, but yeah, it's, one of my goals this year was to, besides being a trail maintainer and someone who goes out often, was to get that Sawyer certification so I could do, more work,
Yeah.
and help out more. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot of miles of trail to maintain and make sure. So it's wonderful to have these local organizations
Yeah.
that are really
Absolutely.
heavily involved with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what about course marking? Again, it's a 100-mile trail. What does that look like at your end? Just briefly touch on, do you have groups of volunteers? I know I sometimes feel like when it comes to course marking, I try, like, I'm so micromanaging. With
Yeah.
it's like I don't want people getting lost, or if somebody makes a bad
Yes.
turn, I need to know.
Yes.
So
Yes. And it was a little bit, this year with it being a new course, that
yeah,
was a little um concerning for sure.
sure,
And when I was out on the course in the weeks leading up to it, I think I sent, text messages to Kendall and Brandon about like, okay, we got to be really careful at, this specific intersection. Like, I know you guys have this on your radar already, but like,
sure,
I'm just putting it out that, I want to make sure it's there. But normally what we do for our course markers is we have a turn by turn document that tells them
gotcha.
like, okay, when you get to, zero point 0.5 miles into this trail, there's an intersection. Make sure you put an X marking going, this way, and make sure the flags are going the other way.
Yeah,
we have them take pictures of the intersections after they mark them
Yeah,
so that if it's done incorrectly, we can kind of get someone out there to fix it after
sure.
the fact.
Mhm.
But yeah, we have a good crew. I mean, the thing about where we are is, we have so many trail runners,
Yeah,
that it's not super hard for us to find people to mark the course. And we
sure.
send out teams of 2 or 3 people, and a lot of times it's people who've done it before as well
Yeah,
and are very familiar with the area. So we're very lucky in that. But we mark the course. We have signs that have arrows and X's and whatever else. And then we also have, we do pin flags in the ground with a reflective tape on them. And it really delights me, when people say, like this year, that people said it ran like a course that you've been using for years. There
sure.
wasn't anything concerning or confusing. But after the race, we do a runner survey, and I was looking at the responses afterwards, and one person said this was the worst marked course I've ever ran, and then the next person said this was the best marked course I've ever
Right,
ran.
right,
So who knows,
right.
but we didn't have, as far as I know, we didn't have anyone like off course for very long. Like
Yeah,
I know a
yeah,
couple
yeah,
of
yeah,
people kind
yeah,
of went, they kept going straight when they were supposed to turn, and then they, realized they hadn't seen a flag, and they went back and they were like, oh, I just
yeah,
missed it. And then, but it wasn't that it wasn't marked. It was just they weren't maybe paying attention. There were a couple confusing, like, someone ended up, there was a spot where we had an aid station that they went to 3 times. Like they got to it the first time, they did an out and back, and they came to it again, and then they did a loop and they came back to it the third time.
right.
So I think, and that was, we'd never done that before. And there was one runner who kind of got sent the wrong way, like he'd
Yeah,
already
yeah,
done the loop and they sent him
yeah,
back out on it by accident, and so
sure.
obviously that's really hard to hear that that happened to a runner, that they were, sent the wrong way. But it's just because it's new. And
Yes,
so, we're already like, all right, if we have to do that again, how can we make sure it's better next
yeah,
year? So,
yeah, yeah. It's always a
yeah.
learning curve, and I don't know. I think at some point you just resign yourself. It's a trail race.
Yes, it's a
Figure it
trail
out,
race.
you know.
I mean, you could market the best you can, and
Right,
somebody
and
will
people
still
still
find a way
go,
to miss.
yep,
Yes.
yep, yep.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just always it's such a game of questioning yourself, and you do the same when you're marking it, and you do the same when you're running it. So,
Yes. And
um,
when you're running 100 miles, it's pretty easy to like space out and miss a
oh
marker,
yeah,
even though it's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
obvious. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so with Hellbender, I know there's such a huge community impact. Are there any, like, just from when I remember researching it, I don't remember seeing any other race like Hellbender in the area. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Tonawah Adventures puts on the Mount Mitchell Heartbreaker, um, 55K and 50 miler. It's on the same trail system, and it's a very similar course. And even though we do have qualifiers for Hellbender, we ask you run, either 100K with, 10,000 feet of gain and loss, or any 100 miler, as a qualifier within 2 years before the race. And we
Sure.
ask that just so we know that people have backcountry and some pretty intense trail experience before they come out and run it, an overnight experience as well. But we do accept Mount Mitchell Heartbreaker 50 miler as a qualifier because it's on the same trails. So,
Yeah.
like, you know what you're getting into if you've run that one.
Right.
As for that, I mean, I've been out to Cruel Jewel,
Yeah.
and I would say that's similar difficulty. I paced the last 25 miles of it a couple of years ago, and they're also have qualifying status, and they're a tough race. They've
Yeah.
they've got some tough trails out there. But yeah, as far as I know, the intensity of our course and all that, there isn't much like it on the East Coast. I mean, there's tough races up north, like Jigger Johnson, I've heard,
Yeah. Yeah.
is
Yeah. Yeah.
intense. Manitou's Revenge, you've got some tough stuff up north,
Sure.
for sure. But like where we are in the South in the mountains, I think we're the only one kind of like us. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I guess before we kind of wrap some of this stuff up, I have two questions for you. And I guess this is more, I would like to get your feedback on it. As a race that's a qualifier for Western States and Hard Rock, What are some of your thoughts about making trail work mandatory? I always feel like, at least where I am, it's very difficult, or I guess I should say it's challenging because most of our trails are maintained by local, nonprofits, mountain bikers primarily. And then it's just so hard to change that trail runner culture where people just don't want to come out and do trail work or volunteer. Is that something that you have found challenging at your end? And would you say now that Hellbender has a status of both qualifying races, that's something you would entertain adding?
Yeah, we actually do have a service work requirement.
Okay.
Runners have to do 8 hours of community related service work. It doesn't have to be trail work, but and it's, they're self-reporting. But it can be volunteering at a race or
Sure.
coaching or volunteering at a, even, a road 5K, 10K, like whatever.
Yeah.
We don't differentiate that it has to be trail work or that it has to be work
Gotcha.
on trails, but it's interesting where I am. The culture here, for sure. Mountain bikers do a ton of our trail maintenance. Pisgah area, Sorba does so much trail work,
Yeah.
and G5 Trail Collective is a lot of mountain bikers as well. We also have a pretty strong backcountry horseman trail organization here that does a lot of the work, and I'm connected to a few of the people within that and within the one in Tennessee also. Um, but we do have a pretty strong base of, hikers. There's Carolina Mountain Club. They have an amazing crew. They have, I don't know how many volunteers they have, but they have crews going out every single day of the week. Like there's a
Yeah.
Monday crew that works in this area, there's a Tuesday crew in this area, and I'm
Sure.
part of um, the wilderness crew. So we work on the wilderness trails. And so I've, brought some people in that way. And then a couple of other locals, John and Christine, who are friends of mine, created a crew that they call the Extra Mile Crew. And the whole premise of it is, there are these trails that need to be maintained that are miles and miles in.
Right.
And a lot of trail maintainers in hiking clubs are retirees. And
Sure.
some of them just aren't capable of hiking many, many miles to get to a spot to do work or hiking a long climb to do work. And so they created this group, and the whole premise is get some trail runners out here because
Yeah.
who can hike 4 miles up a mountain, do trail work, and then hike back? There aren't as many people who can do that, but trail runners can.
And
So
carrying equipment nonetheless.
exactly. So
Not light.
true, and it's been highly successful. And
Sure.
their goal is to kind of get out, I think, for maybe every other month. So, 6 or so times a year. And we've had some really successful work days doing that. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of roped people in. But you're right, and we've talked about this, like mountain bikers kind of had to create their presence on trails because they're not really grandfathered in, I feel like. And so
Right.
they really do a lot of trail work because they're kind of finding, in the beginning, they kind of had to fight their way to get access.
Yeah.
Horseback riders, there's just a culture of it within, and you can carry tools in on horses. That's,
Sure.
and mules, that's easier. Hikers, there's a culture of it because they're the ones who, built these trails in the beginning, or a lot of them. And runners, we just kind of showed up and the trails were already there and we started running on them. So, and obviously it's a big generalization, but that's kind of the
Yeah.
conversation we have, is like, what is the difference? Why do trail runners just not have that within their culture? And
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that was kind of the thought we had, but
Sure.
um, yeah, it's interesting. I do have a few people every year who say, "Hey, I don't have time to do any kind of volunteer work, between training and my family and everything. I don't have 8 hours to do it." And it surprises me because it's, I'm saying anytime within the last year,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
you couldn't find, even 2 hours,
I was
for
just gonna say, yeah.
like maybe just cut your long run short one day
Yeah.
and go volunteer somewhere. But every year, and most runners are just, they volunteered way more hours than they ever need. But it's just, I always get a few that kind of And I'm always surprised by that because
Yeah,
there's so many opportunities
yeah,
to do either trail work or volunteer to race. I mean, every race is looking for volunteers, right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, so it does
Yeah.
really.
I always feel like I get such a pushback for, putting that, like voicing that, because like I feel like trails are just it's so hard to maintain. And without volunteers, I don't know how we can continue to host races and run ourselves. Um, before I let you go, I have, coming from a place where you have a good perspective of the equestrian world and also trail running and being so heavily involved with trail work and all of that, I always feel like there seems to be a tiff between equestrians and mountain bikers, trail runners, just over whether that's like you reckon the trails or like where do you feel, you know, just I just want to hear where you're at with your, riding and also running and race directing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't see much of a conflict between users here. Maybe somewhat like confusion over who has right of way. I had this
Right.
conversation just the other night. Horses always have right of way.
Yeah.
And I'm like, look, we're on a 1,000-pound flight animal. Like,
Right.
it makes sense. Like, please don't run up on us on your mountain bike. But when I've ran into people on trail who, don't know what to do around horses, like if they're on a mountain bike or whatever. Oftentimes they will just kind of try, they'll just come up on us and then they think, oh, I'll just ride past them. And
Yeah.
so usually, it's a moment for education. I just
Sure.
ask them, I'm like, hey, can you stop? I don't know how my horse is going to react. He's pretty used to bikes, but you never know. And then I just have a conversation with them about
Yeah.
it. And I ran into someone a few months ago. I was out in Tennessee. I ride a lot in the Cherokee National Forest out there. And, a mountain biker came up and he immediately stopped and he just said, I don't know what to do. I've never seen a
Yeah.
horse on a trail before. And I said, great. Thank you for saying something that you stopping is exactly what you need to do and talking because
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
horses panic when they don't know when something is, but if they hear a
Sure.
human voice, then they're like, oh, it's just a person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and strangely, horses, like bikes are obviously scary for obvious reasons. They're like a big object coming towards them. And they're more likely to react to a bike than a vehicle,
Yeah.
which is interesting as well. But they also don't like people with backpacks because to them it looks like something is attacking that person.
Right.
Um, and so that's scary to them. But as soon as people talk, I mean, the horses will immediately relax.
Right.
And I always say, if you're on a bike, just wait until we pass you, or if you're going past us, like let us stop, and then, very like wait for direction from the person
Right.
on the horse. And
Right.
I've very, very rarely had negative interactions. And
Sure.
it's usually out of just like someone doesn't know what to do and they kind of panic and do the wrong thing. And then when we talk, they're like, I'm so sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas, I was out running trails recently, just last week, and with a friend, and he moved aside for a mountain biker and said, the mountain biker moved aside for us and waved us on, and he said to them, no, 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 you have right of way. And I was like, no, they don't. People on foot always have right of way,
Right.
and
Right.
unless there's horses around. And he was like, really? And I was
Yeah.
like, yeah. And he's like, oh, well, all the mountain bikers here just blow past us all the time. And I was
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
they're not
It's
supposed
supposed to
to.
stop. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, they're supposed to stop, but so anyway, there is a little of that
Yeah.
kind of conflict where I think people just don't. I want to believe the best in people, and I want to believe that people just don't know, and
Yeah.
whoever taught them, didn't tell them like if you're on a bike you have to stop for people or whatever. But it has to do with education. I
Yeah.
rode trails
Yeah.
in Georgia on my horse a couple of years ago, and every single mountain biker stopped and talked to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoever is out here doing education is doing an amazing job because
Sure.
every single mountain biker I saw knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
So I mean, we don't. I wouldn't say there's like a ton of animosity out here at all.
Sure.
I think our communities are so connected. So many people mountain bike and run or hike. I
Yeah.
don't really see a huge conflict or anything like that. And I know other areas do have those issues. And maybe somebody listening from this area will be like, that's not true. But um,
Yeah.
I don't see it as a huge conflict. And maybe that's because we're the South and like everybody's nice
Yeah.
stereotypically. I don't know, but
Yeah, I mean, I think I was schooled, this is, gosh, going 13 years. I did similarly, as you said, there's a lack of understanding and educating. And I came up on a group of equestrians and I just stopped and kind of started walking behind the 3, 4 line of horses. And uh, one of the guys turned around. He said, "You really need to announce yourself." Because, and same thing, they're because horses are accustomed to human voices and they don't
Mhm.
flinch. And yeah, and it was such an eye opener. You're like, okay, I'm a dumbass. I should have known this. I've been running trails for 15 years now.
Well,
So
they're big animals, and
yeah, yeah,
I think a lot of people like you, like they don't want to scare the horse, so they're
yeah,
quiet, when they don't realize that that's actually kind of concerning.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, if you've never been around horses, it's hard to know what to do for sure.
yeah. And I've actually seen an equestrian get thrown over because of just the commotion. Runners were on the trail as well as and the horse just spooked, and next thing you know, the woman rider was on the ground with her leg on the yeah, it was pretty bad. So, well, Carrie, I think I that's all we have time for. I appreciate you taking time and chatting with me on the podcast. And hopefully I'll make my way back to Hellbender
I
soon.
hope so. You got to make up for that
Yes, no,
DNF.
I did. I actually DNF'd right after. It was horrible rain, and the weather was and I was just mentally shot. But I made it up to Mitchell, and the next I can't remember the name of the aid station. After Mitchell was where I called it that year.
Maybe Culbert's
Yeah,
Creek.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it was like
like
60 or something miles, if I'm remembering
yeah.
correctly. Yeah,
hmm
yeah.
And
So,
you
but
probably, I don't know if you were on that year on Mitchell, we had that awful storm and it was like hailing
yeah, oh
and
yeah, it was
raining
really,
sideways.
yep.
Yeah,
I
that was
was
an
right
awful
there.
year.
Yeah,
Hmm
yeah. I was there, like I said, and I was mentally shot coming down. That drop from Mitchell is snarly, and oh my God, it was so, so, so slick. I think I fell so many times and I was just done. So,
Yeah, I understand. Those trails are not easy when it's good weather
yeah,
and they have water on them even when it hasn't rained in, days. So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you again, and all the best for all the work you guys are doing. I hope again, like I said, our paths will cross soon. With that, thanks for listening to today's episode. And if you're looking for more information on the TURD podcast, visit our website at Terrain Trail Runners, that's runners with an S.com, or give us a follow on the social media channels. Until next time, don't forget to say thank you to your favorite race directors. We appreciate it, and it makes our jobs worth doing.